My name is Alexa, 32 years old, and I was sitting in Attorney Miller's Manhattan office with my hands trembling as I held my grandfather's will. My mother Patricia sat beside me with a victorious smile, already calculating how to spend the $4.85 million. She had no idea that I had spent the last 6 months caring for Grandpa alone while he battled cancer. More importantly, she had not yet heard the last line of the will that would change everything. Before I share this shocking story of greed and justice, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear how one hidden clause in my grandfather's will exposed my mother's true nature and taught our entire family a lesson about what really matters. 6 months before that day in the lawyer's office, my grandfather Theodore had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The doctor gave him 3 to 6 months to live, and I watched as this strong, independent man, who had built his fortune from nothing, suddenly faced his mortality. At 85 years old, Grandpa had lived a full life, but the diagnosis still hit our family like a sledgehammer, though not everyone reacted the same way. My mother Patricia, 58 years old, and currently on her 3rd divorce, immediately started asking about his financial arrangements. She had always been obsessed with money, viewing every relationship through the lens of what she could gain from it. Her 3 failed marriages had all ended when her husbands discovered she was more interested in their bank accounts than in them. She lived in a luxury apartment in Brooklyn that she could not afford, driving a leased Mercedes and wearing designer clothes bought on credit, always expecting that someday she would inherit enough to pay for the lifestyle she pretended to have. My younger brother Jason, 28 and deep in gambling debt, only showed interest when he needed money for his next bet. He had dropped out of college 5 years ago, convinced he could make a living playing poker professionally. Instead, he owed various creditors over $500,000 and had been hiding from collectors for months. He still lived at home with Patricia, who enabled his addiction by occasionally giving him money she did not have, putting both of them deeper in debt. Grandpa Theodore was nothing like his daughter or grandson. He had built his fortune through decades of hard work in real estate, starting with a single rental property in Queens that he bought with his savings from working 2 jobs. Over 40 years he had built that into a portfolio worth millions, but he never flaunted his wealth. He still lived in the same modest house in Westchester that he had bought with Grandma in 1972, drove a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, and wore clothes from Target. Grandma had passed away 5 years earlier from a heart attack, and I knew Grandpa had never fully recovered from losing his wife of 57 years. They had been true partners, building their business together, raising their family together, facing every challenge together. After she died, he told me that half of him had gone with her, and he was just waiting for his time to join her again. When the cancer diagnosis came, I was working as a marketing manager for a tech startup in Manhattan, making decent money, but nothing spectacular. I immediately requested a leave of absence, and when my boss hesitated, I quit on the spot. Some things were more important than a career, and I could not let Grandpa face his final months alone. I moved into his house that same week, taking over the guest room that had once been my mother's childhood bedroom. The walls still had the faded wallpaper with tiny roses that Grandma had picked out in the 70s, and the furniture was the same solid oak set they had bought when they first moved in. Everything in that house told a story of a life well lived, of love that lasted, of values that mattered. Patricia visited exactly 3 times in those 6 months. The first time was to ask Grandpa to sign a power of attorney, giving her control of his finances, which he refused. The second was to bring paperwork for him to sign that would have given her immediate access to his investment accounts, which he also refused. The third time was 2 weeks before he died, when she brought a lawyer friend to try to convince Grandpa that he was not mentally competent to manage his own affairs. Grandpa threw them both out and told Patricia not to come back unless she could visit without an agenda. Jason came by occasionally, always when he needed money. He would sit with Grandpa for exactly as long as it took to ask for a loan, then disappear the moment Grandpa said no. He never offered to help with medications, never stayed for dinner, never asked how Grandpa was feeling beyond the perfunctory greeting. To Jason, Grandpa was just an ATM that was temporarily out of service. Meanwhile, I spent every day and night caring for the man who had been more of a parent to me than my own mother. I learned his medication schedule: 23 pills a day at specific times, some with food, some without some, that could not be taken together. I cooked his favorite meals when he could stomach solid food and made smoothies when he could not. I held the basin when chemotherapy made him sick, cleaned him when he could no longer make it to the bathroom in time, and sat with him through the long, painful nights when sleep would not come. But it was not all darkness and suffering. We had long conversations about his life, about the chances he took, and the mistakes he made. He told me stories about Grandma that I had never heard: about their first date at a soda fountain in 1960, about how he proposed to her 7 times before she said yes, about the year they lived in a one-room apartment with a leaky roof while saving every penny for their first house. He taught me about investing, showing me his portfolio, and explaining why he chose certain stocks over others, how he evaluated real estate opportunities, why compound interest was the 8th wonder of the world. He made me promise to never spend more than I earned, to always have 6 months of expenses in savings, to invest in things I understood rather than following trends. One evening, about a month before he died, he said something that stuck with me. We were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset, him in his favorite rocking chair, with a blanket over his lap, me beside him with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. "Alexa," he said, his voice weaker than it used to be, but still carrying that authority that made people listen. "I am going to leave behind a lot of money when I go, more than most people see in a lifetime. But money is just paper and numbers. It shows you who people really are, brings out their true nature. I have one last lesson to teach this family, and it will not be an easy one to learn." I asked him what he meant, but he just smiled and patted my hand with his own, now thin and marked with IV bruises. "You will see, sweetheart. Just remember that doing the right thing is more valuable than any inheritance. Taking care of people because you love them, not because you expect something in return, that is what makes you wealthy in the ways that matter." 2 weeks later, on a cold February morning, Grandpa passed away in his sleep. I was there holding his hand when he took his last breath. He looked peaceful, like he was finally going home to Grandma. I sat with him for an hour before calling anyone, just the 2 of us, in the quiet morning light, saying goodbye to the man who had shown me what unconditional love looked like. The funeral was a study in contrasts. Patricia arrived in a new black designer dress that still had the tags tucked inside the collar, sobbing dramatically whenever anyone important was watching, but checking her phone between performances. She gave a eulogy that was more about her suffering as a daughter than about Grandpa's life, mentioning 3 times how difficult it had been for her to watch him decline, despite barely visiting him. Jason showed up late, hungover, and had the audacity to ask me if I knew when the will would be read. He spent the service texting someone, probably his bookie, and left immediately after without attending the reception. He did not even sign the guest book. Distant relatives appeared from nowhere, people who had not contacted Grandpa in decades, suddenly overcome with grief at his passing. Cousin Harold, who had not spoken to Grandpa since a business dispute in 1995, delivered a tearful speech about family bonds. Aunt Barbara, Patricia's sister, who lived 20 minutes away but never visited, wailed about losing her beloved uncle. Everyone seemed very interested in expressing their grief, especially after Patricia let slip that Grandpa's estate was worth nearly $5 million. I organized everything for the funeral because Patricia said she was too overcome with sorrow to handle the details. I chose the casket Grandpa would have wanted: simple oak, not the gold monstrosity Patricia initially selected. I picked the flowers white roses like the ones he used to bring Grandma every Friday. I selected the music, the old jazz standards he and Grandma used to dance to in the kitchen. I made sure he was buried next to Grandma, their headstones matching together forever, as they had always planned. The day after the funeral, Patricia was miraculously recovered from her grief, energetically making phone calls to real estate agents about listing Grandpa's house. She had already started sorting through his belongings, setting aside anything that looked valuable, and boxing up the rest for donation. She threw away his worn cardigan, the one that still smelled like his aftershave, the one he wore every evening while reading his newspaper. I rescued it from the trash when she was not looking. 2 weeks after the funeral, we gathered in the Manhattan office of Walter Miller, Grandpa's attorney, an old friend from his Navy days. The office was on the 40th floor of a building overlooking Central Park, all mahogany and leather, and the kind of understated elegance that whispered old money. Miller himself was in his 80s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the type of lawyer who still believed in handshakes and keeping your word. Patricia arrived early, which should have been my first warning sign. She never arrived early for anything unless money was involved. She wore a conservative black suit that made her look like a grieving widow rather than a daughter, and she had brought a leather portfolio with legal pads and pens ready to take notes on her newfound fortune. She kept checking her phone and smiling at whatever she was reading, probably real estate listings for the Hamptons house she had always wanted. Jason slouched in 5 minutes late wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt that looked like he had slept in it. His eyes were bloodshot, and he kept fidgeting with his phone, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. I knew that look. He owed someone money, and they were not the patient type. He had already asked me twice if I could loan him just $10,000 to get him through the month, promising he would pay me back as soon as the estate was settled. I sat between them, wearing a simple navy dress I had bought for my first job interview years ago. I had not brought anything to take notes with because I was not expecting anything. Grandpa had always been generous with me while he was alive, paying for my college education and helping me with my first apartment deposit. I assumed whatever he left me would be a token amount, maybe some books from his library or Grandma's china set. The real inheritance would go to Patricia as his only child. Miller cleared his throat and opened a manila folder that looked like it had been handled many times. Before we begin, he said, his voice still strong, despite his age, "I want you all to know that Theodore was one of my closest friends. We served together in Vietnam, started our careers at the same time, were each other's best men at our weddings. I knew him for over 60 years, and I can tell you that every decision in this will was made with careful thought and complete mental clarity." Patricia leaned forward eagerly, her hands clasped on the table like a student waiting for exam results. "Just tell us the details, Walter. We all know Daddy wanted his family taken care of." Miller gave her a long look over his glasses, then began reading. "The estate of Theodore James Patterson, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeaths the following assets totaling approximately $4,850,000 in value." Patricia actually gasped at the number, though she had already known the approximate value from her snooping. Jason's eyes went wide, and I could see him doing mental math calculating how much would be needed to pay off his debts and how much would be left for him to gamble with. "The estate consists of the following," Miller continued. "The primary residence in Westchester County valued at $2 million. Investment portfolio including stocks, bonds, and mutual funds valued at $1.8 million. Commercial real estate holdings valued at $800,000. Personal belongings, vehicles, and cash accounts valued at $250,000. Patricia was practically vibrating with excitement, and the distribution she asked not even pretending to be subtle about her greed. Miller adjusted his glasses and continued reading. "As executor of this estate, I name my daughter, Patricia Ann Patterson Morrison, to oversee the distribution of assets according to the instructions contained herein." Patricia sat back with a satisfied smile, the kind of expression a cat has after cornering a mouse. She looked at me with barely concealed triumph, already imagining herself as the benevolent matriarch distributing crumbs to her children while keeping the feast for herself. "The executor shall be responsible for settling all debts, liquidating assets as necessary, and distributing the inheritance according to my wishes," Miller read. "The executor shall receive a fee of 3% of the total estate value for their services." 3%. Patricia was already calculating. That was $145,000 just for being executor before any actual inheritance. She pulled out her phone and started typing, probably telling her latest boyfriend that their money problems were over. Now, Miller said, setting down the first page and picking up another, "There are specific bequests to be made before the residual estate is divided." Patricia's smile faltered slightly. She had not expected specific bequests. She had assumed everything would go into one pot that she would control. "To my grandson, Jason Michael Morrison, I leave the sum of $50,000 to be placed in a trust that will pay out $5,000 per year for 10 years. This trust cannot be accessed early, cannot be used as collateral for loans, and will be forfeit if Jason is convicted of any gambling-related crimes. Jason's face went red, then white. $50,000 over 10 years was nothing compared to what he owed. His creditors would not wait 10 years for $5,000 annual payments. He started to protest, but Miller held up a hand. To my dear friend Walter Miller, I leave my collection of first edition books and my Navy medals with gratitude for 60 years of friendship and trust. Miller's eyes grew misty, and he paused to compose himself before continuing. To various charities listed in Appendix A, I leave a total of $200,000 to be distributed equally among them. Patricia's smile was now completely gone. That was $250,000 in specific bequests, plus the executor fee. That left about $4.4 million for the residual estate. Still a fortune, but she had been counting on the full amount. The residual estate, Miller continued, shall be distributed as follows. Patricia leaned forward again, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for since Grandpa got sick. Given that my daughter Patricia has over the past 10 years received advances on her inheritance totaling $800,000 as documented in Appendix B, and has never attempted to repay these loans despite repeated promises to do so, I consider her inheritance already distributed. The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. $800,000. When? How that cannot be right. Miller pulled out another folder, this one containing copies of checks, signed loan agreements, and email correspondence. January 2015, $100,000 for your second divorce lawyer. March 2016, $50,000 for your business venture that never materialized. September 2017, $75,000 for debt consolidation. Shall I continue? There are 37 transactions in total. Patricia's face cycled through emotions like a slideshow. Shock, anger, embarrassment, fury. Those were not advances. Those were gifts. Loans at worst. Daddy said I did not have to pay them back. Theodore kept meticulous records, Miller said calmly. Every transaction includes a signed agreement from you, acknowledging it as an advance on your inheritance. You may not remember signing them, but your signature is on every document. This is ridiculous. Patricia stood up her chair, scraping against the floor. I am his daughter, his only child. He cannot just cut me out because of some old loans. Miller continued as if she had not spoken. Therefore, the residual estate minus the specific bequests and executor fee already mentioned totaling approximately $4.4 million is to be held in trust for 1 year. A trust. Patricia sat back down heavily. What kind of trust? Who is the beneficiary that brings us to the final provision? Miller said, picking up the last page of the will. This is where Theodore wanted to teach that final lesson he often spoke about. Patricia went very still like a predator sensing danger. What lesson? What are you talking about? Miller began reading the final paragraph, and I watched the color drain from Patricia's face with each word. Miller adjusted his glasses and read the final provision in a steady, clear voice that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent office. Should the executor of this estate attempt to circumvent these instructions, hide assets, manipulate the beneficiaries, or otherwise act in bad faith against the spirit of this, a secondary provision will immediately take effect. This provision was added as a codicil 6 months before my death, witnessed by 3 independent parties, and registered with the state of New York. Patricia's hands were shaking now, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. What secondary provision? What are you talking about, Walter? This is not making any sense. Daddy would not do this to me. Miller pulled out another document, this one with multiple official seals and signatures. Theodore anticipated that there might be challenges to his will. He knew his family very well, perhaps better than you realized. This codicil states that if the executor fails to act with complete integrity, the entire estate will transfer to the person who provided primary caregiving during his final illness, as documented by medical records, witness testimony, and Theodore's own daily journal. The words hung in the air like a sword over Patricia's head. She turned to look at me, and I saw something I had never seen before in my mother's eyes. Fear. That would be Alexa Miller continued looking at me with something like approval. Theodore kept detailed records of who visited, who helped with his care, who was present during his chemotherapy treatments, who spent nights in the hospital with him. Would you like me to read from his journal? No, Patricia said quickly, then seemed to catch herself. I mean, that will not be necessary. Of course I will execute the will according to Daddy's wishes. I would never do anything inappropriate. Jason finally found his voice. Wait, so Mom controls $4 million for a year, and then what? Where does it go after that? Miller smiled slightly the first time his expression had changed since we arrived. That depends entirely on how your mother handles her responsibilities as executor. The trust has very specific conditions. The assets must be properly maintained, all taxes must be paid, the house must not be sold for less than market value, and detailed monthly reports must be submitted to me as trustee. If all conditions are met for 1 year, the estate will be divided equally between Patricia's children, Alexa, and Jason. Patricia's face went through another transformation from fear to calculation. So I just have to manage things properly for a year, and then the kids inherit. That seems simple enough. However, Miller continued, and I could tell he was enjoying this a little. If at any point during that year, evidence emerges that the executor has attempted to manipulate, hide, or misappropriate assets, the secondary provision triggers immediately. All assets transfer to Alexa as the documented primary caregiver, and the executor forfeits all claims to the estate, including the executor fee. Patricia was sweating now despite the air conditioning in the office. She had already been planning something, I could see it in her eyes. She had probably already contacted real estate agents, financial advisors, maybe even lawyers to help her find loopholes. Now she was trapped between her greed and her fear of losing everything. Furthermore, Miller added, pulling out yet another document, Theodore left this sealed envelope with instructions that it should only be opened if there are any disputes about the will or attempts to challenge its provisions. He said it contains information that would, and I quote, make certain decisions very clear to everyone involved. Patricia lunged for the envelope, but Miller pulled it back. This remains sealed unless needed, Patricia. Those were Theodore's specific instructions. The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of traffic 40 floors below. Patricia was breathing heavily, her carefully applied makeup starting to run with perspiration. Jason looked confused, still trying to understand what all of this meant for his debts. I sat perfectly still, remembering Grandpa's words about his final lesson. I need some time to think about this, Patricia said finally, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. This is all very complicated, and I want to make sure I handle everything correctly. Of course, Miller said, returning the documents to their folders. You have 30 days to formally accept or decline the role of executor. If you decline, an alternate executor named in the will would take over. Who is the alternate? Patricia asked, though I think we all knew the answer. Alexa Miller replied simply. Patricia stood up abruptly, gathering her unused legal pads and pens. I will be in touch, Walter. Come on, Jason, we are leaving. Jason looked at me apologetically as he followed Patricia out. He had not said anything directly to me during the entire meeting, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He needed money desperately, and now he knew there were millions at stake. After they left, Miller and I sat in silence for a moment. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small key. Your grandfather asked me to give this to you privately, he said, handing it to me. He said you would know what it was for. I recognized it immediately. It was the key to Grandpa's safety deposit box at the bank, the one he had shown me years ago when he was teaching me about financial planning. I had forgotten about it completely. There is one more thing, Miller said, his professional demeanor softening into something more personal. Your grandfather loved you very much, Alexa. He talked about you constantly in those final months, about how proud he was of the woman you had become. He said you were the only one who loved him for who he was, not for what he had. I felt tears welling up for the first time since the funeral. Thank you for telling me that, Walter. It means more than you know. Be careful, he warned as I prepared to leave. Your mother is a desperate woman, and desperate people do desperate things. If you notice anything unusual, any attempts to move assets or change documentation, call me immediately. Theodore set this up to protect you and teach Patricia a lesson, but she will not learn it easily. I left Miller's office with the key in my pocket and a growing sense of unease. Patricia had been too quiet at the end, too accepting. In 32 years of being her daughter, I had learned that when Patricia Morrison got quiet, she was planning something. The next few days confirmed my suspicions. Patricia threw herself into her role as executor with suspicious enthusiasm. She hired an appraiser to value Grandpa's house, but I discovered she was using someone known for undervaluing properties for quick sales. She started moving money between Grandpa's accounts, claiming she was consolidating for easier management. She even tried to get me to sign a document that would have given her power of attorney over my future inheritance, saying it was just a formality to make the process smoother. I refused to sign anything, which led to our first major confrontation. She showed up at my apartment at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, having clearly had a few glasses of wine for courage. "You ungrateful little brat," she slurred, pushing her way into my living room. "After everything I have done for you, you cannot even sign a simple piece of paper to help your mother." "What exactly have you done for me, Mom?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear her answer. "I gave you life. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you and your brother." "You were never home," I reminded her. "Grandma and Grandpa raised me. They paid for my education. They taught me everything I know. You were too busy with your boyfriends and your schemes to notice I existed unless you needed a babysitter for Jason." Her face contorted with rage. "You poisoned him against me. You manipulated a dying old man to steal my inheritance. That money belongs to me. I am his daughter, and I am his granddaughter who actually cared about him." I shot back. I held his hand through chemo. I cleaned up his vomit. I changed his sheets when he could not make it to the bathroom. "Where were you?" "Shopping for funeral dresses." She slapped me. Hard. My cheeks stung and my ears rang, but I did not step back. I just looked at her steadily, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. She was not a mother who had lost her way. She was a parasite who had lost her host. "Get out," I said quietly. "Get out of my apartment and do not come back." "This is not over," she hissed as she left. "That money is mine, and I will get it one way or another. You will see." After she left, I called Walter Miller and told him about the visit. He documented everything and suggested I install security cameras in my apartment, which I did the next day. It turned out to be a wise decision. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia's behavior became increasingly erratic. She called me dozens of times a day, alternating between tearful apologies and vicious threats. She sent Jason to my apartment to plead her case, promising him a bigger share of the inheritance if he could convince me to cooperate. She even contacted my ex-boyfriend from college, trying to dig up dirt she could use against me. Then she made her first real mistake. She tried to sell Grandpa's house without proper authorization, listing it with a real estate agent for $1.2,800,000 below its assessed value. The agent, who happened to be her new boyfriend Derek, had already found a buyer who was willing to pay cash with no inspection. The buyer turned out to be a shell company that Derek owned. Miller caught it immediately when the paperwork crossed his desk for approval. He called me right away. "Your mother has just attempted to commit fraud," he said without preamble. "This triggers the secondary provision. The entire estate now transfers to you. I need you to come to my office tomorrow to sign the papers." I sat down heavily on my couch, the phone still pressed to my ear. $4.4 million. The number did not seem real. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Maybe she just did not understand the process," Alexa Miller said gently. She knew exactly what she was doing. "The buyer is her boyfriend's company. They were going to flip the house for its true value and pocket the difference. This was deliberate fraud. Your grandfather predicted something like this would happen. How could he have known?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Because she has done it before," Miller replied. That sealed envelope contains documentation of Patricia's past schemes, including embezzling from your grandmother's estate after she died. Your grandfather kept quiet about it for the sake of family peace, but he was not going to let her do it again. The next morning, I arrived at Miller's office to find Patricia already there with her own lawyer, an aggressive-looking man in an expensive suit who immediately started threatening litigation. "My client has been wrongfully removed as executor based on a simple misunderstanding," he announced. "We are prepared to challenge this will on the grounds of undue influence. Clearly, Ms. Alexa Morrison manipulated her grandfather in his weakened state." Miller calmly placed a tape recorder on the table. "Would you like to hear Theodore's video testimony recorded 3 months before his death in the presence of 3 witnesses, including his doctor, who certified his mental competence?" The lawyer faltered. Video testimony. Miller pressed play. Grandpa's voice filled the room, weak but clear. My name is Theodore James Patterson. I am of sound mind, as certified by my physician, Dr. Marcus Chen, who is present for this recording. I am making this video to clarify my intentions regarding my will, specifically concerning my daughter, Patricia. I heard Patricia's sharp intake of breath, but I did not look at her. I kept my eyes on the recorder, listening to Grandpa's voice one more time. Patricia has been taking money from me for over a decade, always with promises to repay, always with elaborate stories of need. I have documentation of $800,000 in loans she has never attempted to repay. After her mother died, I discovered Patricia had been stealing from her as well, taking jewelry and selling it, accessing accounts she had no right to touch. I said nothing then because I hoped she would change. She has not. The recording continued for 20 minutes, detailing Patricia's various deceptions, including forged checks, stolen credit cards, and manipulation of Grandma in her final years. Grandpa had evidence of everything had known all along, had chosen to give her one last chance with the executor role. I am leaving this recording in case Patricia attempts to contest my will or defraud the estate, Grandpa concluded. If you are hearing this, it means she has proven herself incapable of change. In that case, I want everything to go to Alexa, who has shown me more genuine love and care than I ever received from my own daughter. Alexa, if you are listening to this, know that you were the granddaughter I always hoped for. Take care of Jason if you can. He is weak, but not evil. Your mother, I am afraid, is both. The recording ended. Patricia's lawyer was already packing his briefcase. This changes things, he muttered. I need to consult with my client. There is more, Miller said, pulling out the sealed envelope. Shall I continue? No. Patricia stood up so fast her chair fell backward. Fine. I will not contest the will. I will sign whatever you want. Just do not open that envelope. She looked at me then, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother clearly. She was not a victim of circumstances or bad luck. She was a predator who had finally been caught. The paperwork was signed within an hour. The entire estate transferred to me minus Jason's $50,000 trust and the charitable donations. Patricia received nothing, not even the executor fee, since she had violated her fiduciary duty. As she was leaving, she turned to me one last time. I hope you are happy, she said. You have destroyed our family. No, Mom, I replied. You destroyed our family long ago. I am just choosing not to let you destroy me too. She left without another word, and I have not seen her since. Jason approached me separately later that week. He was in bad shape, his creditors closing and his gambling addiction spiraling out of control. Alexa, please, he begged. I know I do not deserve it, but I need help. Not money, he added quickly, seeing my expression. I need real help. Rehab, therapy. I want to get better. I do not want to end up like Mom. It was the first time he had ever admitted he had a problem, the first time he had asked for help instead of money. I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of the little brother I used to protect from Patricia's temper, the boy who would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Grandpa left instructions for this, I told him. There is a rehab facility in Arizona that he researched. 6-month program fully paid, but you have to complete it. If you leave early, that is it. No second chances. He started crying. Then my tough guy little brother, who had spent years pretending nothing could touch him. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for not giving up on me. He left for Arizona the next week, and for the first time in years, I had hoped that he might actually make it. With Jason in rehab and Patricia out of the picture, I found myself alone with the responsibility of Grandpa's estate. The house in Westchester sat empty, filled with memories and ghosts. I spent a week there going through his things, finding treasures I had never known existed. In his study, I discovered boxes of letters between him and Grandma from when he was in Vietnam. Love letters that showed a side of their relationship I had never seen, passionate and young and full of dreams for their future. I found photo albums from their trips around the world, pictures of them laughing in Paris, dancing in Buenos Aires, standing in front of the Taj Mahal holding hands. In the basement, I found Grandpa's workshop where he had been secretly building dollhouses, beautiful, intricate Victorian mansions with working lights and hand-carved furniture. There was a note attached to one of them for my great-granddaughter someday. Love, Grandpa Ted. He had been hoping I would have children would carry on the family in a better way than Patricia had. But the most important discovery came when I finally used the key Miller had given me to open Grandpa's safety deposit box. Inside was $20,000 in cash, a folder of important documents, and a letter addressed to me. My dearest Alexa. It began in Grandpa's careful handwriting. If you are reading this, then everything has unfolded as I expected. Your mother has shown her true nature, and you have inherited not just my money, but the responsibility that comes with it. The letter went on for pages, filled with advice, memories, and love. But one paragraph stood out. I know you will wonder why I did things this way, why I did not just leave everything to you directly. The truth is, I needed Patricia to reveal herself not just to you, but to everyone. For too long, our family has enabled her behavior, made excuses, looked the other way. This was my final gift to you and Jason, the truth, undeniable and documented. Now you can both be free of her manipulation. You do not have to feel guilty for protecting yourselves from someone who would devour you if given the chance. At the bottom of the letter was a list of people Grandpa had helped over the years, families who were struggling students he had put through college, small businesses he had quietly supported. He asked me to continue this work, to use the wealth not just for myself, but to make a difference in other lives. I spent the next month settling into my new reality. I hired a financial advisor, someone Grandpa had recommended in his letter, to help me manage the investments. I put the house on the market properly for its full value, with plans to donate part of the proceeds to the hospital where Grandpa received treatment. I established a scholarship fund at his old high school, focusing on students who, like him, came from nothing, but had the drive to build something. Then came the call from Jason's rehab facility. He wanted me to visit for Family Week, part of his treatment program. I flew to Arizona not knowing what to expect, worried that this was just another manipulation. But the Jason I found there was different. Sober for the first time in years, he looked younger somehow, like the weight of his addiction had aged him prematurely. During our therapy sessions, truths came out that explained so much. Patricia had introduced him to gambling when he was 15, taking him to Atlantic City and teaching him to play cards. She had used his winnings to pay her bills, and when he started losing, she had connected him with his first loan shark. She had created his addiction and then fed it using his desperation to control him. I never had a chance, he said during one session, the therapist watching carefully. She made me believe that winning big was the only way to earn her love. Even when I knew it was destroying me, I could not stop because stopping meant losing her approval. How sick is that? She destroyed me for money, and I kept going back for more. The therapist helped us work through our shared trauma, the ways Patricia had pitted us against each other, used our need for maternal love as a weapon. For the first time, Jason and I talked honestly about our childhood, about the nights Patricia would disappear for days, leaving us alone with whatever boyfriend was current, about the hunger when she spent the grocery money on clothes, about the constant anxiety of never knowing which version of her would walk through the door. I am sorry, Jason said on my last day there, for everything, for not being there when Grandpa was sick, for choosing Mom over you, for being weak. I am sorry you had to be the strong one all the time. I forgave him. It was easier than I expected because I finally understood that we were both victims of the same predator. The difference was that I had found the strength to break free earlier while Jason was just starting his journey. When I got back to New York, there was a letter waiting from Patricia's lawyer. She was suing me for emotional distress, claiming I had conspired with Grandpa to humiliate her. The lawsuit was baseless, Miller assured me, but it showed that Patricia was not going to go quietly. Then things escalated. My apartment was broken into, though nothing was taken. My car tires were slashed. I started receiving anonymous, threatening messages. The security cameras I had installed caught a figure that looked like Derek, Patricia's boyfriend, lurking around my building at night. Miller helped me get a restraining order, but I knew that would not stop someone as desperate as Patricia. So I made a decision that Grandpa probably would have approved of. I hired a private investigator to dig into Patricia's past to find out what was in that sealed envelope that had scared her so badly. What the investigator found was worse than I imagined. Patricia had been married 4 times, not 3. The first husband, when she was 22, had died under suspicious circumstances, leaving her a life insurance policy worth $500,000. The death was ruled accidental, but the investigator found witnesses who suggested otherwise. There were other victims, too. An elderly man she had dated who had changed his will in her favor just before dying. A business partner who had lost everything after Patricia drained their joint accounts. A trail of destruction that went back 30 years. Armed with this information, I had Miller arrange a final meeting with Patricia. She came to his office looking haggard, her usually perfect appearance crumbling. The designer clothes were gone, replaced with off-the-rack substitutes. Derek had left her when he realized there was no money coming. "I know what you did," I told her simply. "All of it. The first husband, the elderly boyfriend, the embezzlement, everything." Her face went white. "You do not know anything," she said, but her voice shook. I placed a folder on the table between us. Copies of everything the investigator found. The real contents of Grandpa's sealed envelope, which I had finally opened. Police reports, witness statements, a pattern of behavior that would interest law enforcement if I chose to share it. "Here is what is going to happen," I said, channeling Grandpa's calm authority. "You are going to leave New York. You are going to stop harassing me and Jason. You are going to get help for whatever is broken inside you that makes you hurt everyone who loves you. In exchange, I will not go to the police with this information. You cannot threaten me," she said, but there was no fight left in her voice. "I am not threatening you, Mom. I am giving you a chance that you never gave anyone else, a chance to walk away and start over. But if you ever contact me or Jason again, if you ever try to hurt us or anyone else, I will make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not love, not remorse, but maybe recognition. Recognition that she had finally met someone she could not manipulate, could not break, could not devour. She took the deal. 6 months after that confrontation, my life had settled into something I had never experienced before: peace. Patricia had moved to Florida according to the last update from my investigator, and was working as a receptionist at a dental office. She had kept her end of the bargain: no contact, no harassment, just silence. Jason completed his rehab program and chose to stay in Arizona. He got a job at the facility as a maintenance worker, wanting to give back to the place that had saved his life. He called me every Sunday, and we talked about everything and nothing, rebuilding the sibling relationship Patricia had poisoned. During one call, he told me something that helped me understand our mother better. The therapist says Mom probably has something called narcissistic personality disorder, maybe with some other stuff mixed in. She is not capable of real love, Lex. She can only see people as sources of supply money, attention, whatever she needs. It is like she is missing the part of her brain that feels empathy. I thought about that a lot in the following weeks. It did not excuse what she had done, but it explained it. Patricia was broken in a way that could not be fixed by love or patience or second chances. She was a void that would consume anything given to her and still demand more. I kept Grandpa's house for several months, unable to let go of the last physical connection to him. But eventually I realized that holding on to it was holding me back. The memories were not in the walls or the furniture, but in my heart where they belonged. Instead of selling to strangers, I had an idea. I contacted the local veterans organization and offered to donate the house for transitional housing for veterans returning from deployment. Grandpa would have loved that his home continuing to serve those who had served. The organization was overwhelmed with gratitude, and at the dedication ceremony, they unveiled a plaque, Theodore Patterson House, in honor of a Vietnam veteran who never forgot his brothers in arms. With the house settled, I turned my attention to the fortune I had inherited. $4 million was more money than I had ever dreamed of having, but I remembered Grandpa's words about responsibility. I set aside enough to live comfortably, to buy a modest home of my own to have security. The rest went into the Theodore and Margaret Patterson Foundation, dedicated to education and supporting families affected by addiction. The foundation's first grant went to the rehab facility where Jason had gotten clean funding, 10 scholarships for people who could not afford treatment. The second went to a program that taught financial literacy in high schools, making sure kids understood compound interest and budgeting before they became adults. The third established a support group for family members of addicts, providing the resources I wished I had growing up. I returned to work not because I needed the money, but because I needed the purpose. My boss was shocked when I came back, having assumed I would quit after inheriting millions. But I loved my job, loved the challenge of marketing, loved being part of a team, building something. The inheritance gave me freedom, but work gave me identity. One day, about 8 months after Grandpa died, I was cleaning out my closet when I found the cardigan I had rescued from Patricia's trash pile. It still smelled faintly of his aftershave, Old Spice, and something uniquely him. I put it on and sat on my couch, feeling his presence around me like a hug. That is when I found the note in the pocket. His handwriting shaky but clear. Alexa, always remember that love is not measured in dollars, but in moments. The moments you gave me in my final months were worth more than all the money I could leave behind. Be happy, sweetheart. That is all I ever wanted for you. I cried, then really cried for the first time since he died. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. Gratitude for the grandfather who had loved me unconditionally, who had protected me even from beyond the grave, who had given me not just money, but the freedom to live without fear or manipulation. A year after his death, I organized a memorial service at the Veterans Cemetery where he was buried next to Grandma. Jason flew in from Arizona looking healthy and clear-eyed. Even Walter Miller attended, bringing some of Grandpa's old Navy buddies who shared stories that made us laugh and cry. Patricia did not come, of course, but I had stopped expecting her to be anything other than what she was. You cannot force someone to change, cannot love them into being better. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let them go and protect yourself from their damage. At the memorial, Jason spoke about the grandfather he wished he had known better, the man he was only now understanding through the lens of sobriety. He talked about forgiveness, not just of others, but of ourselves, about breaking cycles of dysfunction, about choosing to be better than our worst moments. I spoke about love and legacy, about how Grandpa's true inheritance was not the money, but the lessons he taught. About integrity and hard work, about protecting those who cannot protect themselves, about the courage to stand up to bullies even when they share your blood. About how sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no to someone who would destroy you with their yes. After the service, Jason and I stood at the gravesite, looking at the headstones of our grandparents together forever as they should be. "Do you think they would be proud?" Jason asked quietly. "I think they would be relieved," I replied. "Relieved that we broke free, that we are healing, that we are choosing different paths than the one Patricia laid out for us." He nodded, then surprised me by pulling out a 1-year sobriety chip. "I got this yesterday," he said. 1 year clean. I wanted to tell Grandpa first, but telling you feels right too." I hugged him, then my little brother, who was finally becoming the man he was meant to be. We stood there in the cemetery, 2 orphans of a living mother, finally understanding that family is not just about blood, but about choice. We chose each other, chose healing, chose to honor our grandparents by living better lives than we had been taught to live. As we walked away, I looked back one more time at Grandpa's headstone. The inscription read, "Theodore James Patterson, beloved husband, father, grandfather." He taught by example until the very end, and he had. His final lesson was not just about money or greed or justice. It was about love, the kind that protects, even when it would be easier to enable the kind that teaches hard truths, even when comfortable lies would be simpler. He had loved us enough to show us who Patricia really was, freeing us from the obligation to pretend she was something she was not. 2 years have passed since that day in Walter Miller's office when my world changed forever. 2 years of growth, healing, and understanding. The foundation has helped hundreds of families. Jason is thriving in his new life, and I have built something Grandpa would be proud of. I bought a house in Westchester, not far from where Grandpa lived. Nothing grand, just a 3-bedroom colonial with a garden where I grow the same roses Grandma loved. I have dinner parties now, real ones with friends who know my whole story and love me anyway. I date occasionally, carefully, having learned to spot the red flags Patricia taught me to ignore. Jason visits every few months, and we cook Grandpa's recipes together, the ones I saved from his kitchen. He is studying to become an addiction counselor, wanting to help others the way he was helped. He has a girlfriend now, someone he met in recovery, and they support each other in ways that amaze me. Last month I received a letter forwarded through Walter Miller's office. Patricia's handwriting, which I recognized immediately. My hands shook as I opened it, wondering what manipulation she was attempting now. But it was not what I expected. It was short, just a few lines, Alexa. I will not ask for forgiveness because I do not deserve it. I will not make excuses because there are none. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what Dad was trying to teach me. It took losing everything to see it. I hope you and Jason are well. You were always the daughter Dad deserved. Patricia. I read it several times looking for the angle, the manipulation, the hook. But maybe there was not one. Maybe finally Patricia had hit bottom hard enough to crack open the shell of her narcissism. Or maybe this was just another game, a long con I could not see yet. Either way, I filed the letter away and moved on. Patricia had taken up enough space in my life. She did not get to take any more, not even with an apology. The real letter that mattered came from Jason on the 2nd anniversary of Grandpa's death. Sis, 2 years ago. I was dying. Maybe not physically, but in every other way that mattered. Grandpa's death and what followed saved my life. Not the money, but the truth. The truth about Mom, about myself, about what family really means. You stood by me when you had every reason to walk away. You gave me a chance when I had burned through all of them. That is what Grandpa would call real wealth, the kind you cannot put in a bank. Thank you for being the sister I did not deserve, but desperately needed. Thank you for breaking the cycle with me. Love, Jason. That letter sits framed on my desk next to a photo of Grandpa and me from that last summer. In it, he is thin and clearly ill, but his eyes are bright with love, and something else, maybe pride, maybe peace, maybe just the satisfaction of knowing his final lesson would be learned. People sometimes ask me if I regret how things turned out with Patricia, if I wish we could have been a normal family. The answer changes depending on the day. Sometimes I mourn the mother I never had, the relationship that existed only in my imagination. But mostly I am grateful for the clarity, for the freedom that comes from accepting people as they are rather than as you wish they were. Grandpa's $4.85 million was never just about money. It was about revealing truth-breaking chains and teaching lessons that could not be learned any other way. He knew Patricia would expose herself, knew Jason would hit bottom, knew I would need to be strong enough to handle it all. He orchestrated his final act with the precision of a man who had spent a lifetime watching and learning. In his letter to me there was a P.S. I had not noticed the first time I read it. P.S. Remember, sweetheart, that fortune is not what you have, but what you do with what you have. Your mother will always see wealth as something to take. You see it as something to share. That is why you are truly my heir, not just in money but in spirit. Take care of Jason. He has your heart, but not your strength. Yet. He was right as usual. Jason did have my heart, and he found his strength. The money gave us freedom, but truth gave us peace. And in the end, that was Grandpa's greatest gift, not the millions, but the mirror he held up to our family, forcing us to see ourselves clearly and choose who we wanted to be. I still wear his cardigan sometimes when I need to feel close to him. I still cook his favorite meal on his birthday. I still hear his voice in my head when I face difficult decisions, asking me not what is easy, but what is right. The foundation continues to grow, helping families torn apart by addiction and greed. Every person we help is a small victory against the darkness Patricia represents. Every success story is proof that cycles can be broken, that people can change, that love can triumph over manipulation. Last week, I visited Grandpa's grave to tell him about the Foundation's latest project, a residential program for young adults aging out of foster care. As I was leaving, I saw an elderly man placing flowers on a grave nearby. He looked familiar, and then I realized it was one of Grandpa's Navy buddies from the memorial service. He recognized me too and came over to talk. "Your grandfather saved my life in Vietnam," he said. "Not in battle, but after. I was drinking myself to death, and he got me help paid for treatment, never asked for anything in return. He did that for a lot of us. Never talked about it, just quietly helped when we needed it. He paused, then added, "He would be proud of what you are doing with his money. But more than that, he would be proud of who you have become. You are just like him, you know. The same quiet strength, the same generous heart, the same refusal to let toxic people poison your life." As I drove home that day, I thought about legacy and inheritance, about what we leave behind and what we carry forward. Grandpa left me money, yes, but more importantly, he left me free. Free from Patricia's manipulation, free from false obligations, free to choose my own path. And that freedom, that truth, that clarity was worth more than $4.85 million. It was priceless. The last line on the paper changed everything, not because it gave me money, but because it gave me permission. Permission to protect myself, to choose health over dysfunction, to build something beautiful from the ashes of our broken family. Grandpa always said that money shows you who people really are. He was right. It showed us that Patricia was exactly who we feared she was. It showed us that Jason had the capacity to change when given the chance. And it showed me that I was stronger than I knew capable of standing up to a lifetime of manipulation and choosing love anyway. Not love for Patricia, who had proven herself unworthy of it, but love for Jason, for Grandpa's memory, for the families we helped through the foundation, for the life I have built on the solid ground of truth, rather than the shifting sands of lies. That is the real inheritance. That is the fortune that cannot be stolen or squandered. That is Grandpa's final gift, delivered through a will that was really a love letter, a protection spell, and a roadmap to freedom, all in one. $4.85 million. Such a specific number, but in the end, just a number. The real value was in the lesson, the truth, the freedom, and that, as Grandpa knew, was absolutely priceless. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who tried to take advantage of you? What would you do if you discovered someone you trusted was not who they seemed to be? How do you balance loyalty to family with protecting yourself from toxic behavior? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family truth and the complicated nature of inheritance. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it is okay to protect yourself from family members who would harm you. That love sometimes means saying no, and that the greatest inheritance is not always money, but wisdom. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find the strength to face hard truths, the wisdom to know when to walk away, and the courage to build something beautiful from even the most broken beginnings. Remember, you cannot choose the family you are born into, but you can choose the life you build despite them.